Sorry. Okay, now I'll start reading my script again, which says bones reading. Noodle, the 13-year-old pug, woke up with bones today, which means we're going to have a great council meeting. That's actually what it says. All right, next. Good afternoon. My name is Esther Manheimer. I'm the mayor of the city of Asheville, and welcome to the November 9th City Council meeting. For tonight's meeting, all council members and staff are participating virtually. For those of you out there with us today, welcome. To help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. We are streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engagement hub link on the front page of the city website. We also have an option for the public to listen live by phone by dialing 855-925-2801 and entering the code 8635. We're also broadcasting live on the city's YouTube channel. For public comment, we ask callers to sign up in advance to join the live speaker queue. We will only be taking live comments from those who signed up prior to tonight's meeting. Those callers have been provided instructions on how to participate. Each caller is allotted 3 minutes to speak for each agenda item. We will hear live comments for up to 1 hour for each agenda item. A reminder to callers, you will first hear staff inform council that you're next to speak. Then you will hear an automated message letting you know you are unmuted and live in the meeting. You may begin speaking after the automated message. To best ensure staff can support you in the case of technical difficulties, we ask that you join the queue no later than the beginning of the agenda item before the agenda item on which you have signed up to speak. Additionally, if you have joined the speaker queue and need to be disconnected before you get disconnected before your time to speak, please hit *4 before hanging up. You can then call back in using the same directions I just shared, and staff will enter you back into the speaker queue of your agenda item. I would like to ask those participating in tonight's public comment to follow council's rules of decorum. The rules include the following. Speakers are only allowed to speak one time during the public comment period for each agenda item. A person must speak only if they have signed up to speak in accordance with the city's procedures. Speaker substitutions at the meeting are not allowed. Each speaker is allotted 3 minutes to speak on an agenda item. In general, each agenda item will have up to a total of 1 hour for public comment. A speaker may not share or relinquish any remaining time they have not used to another speaker. Speakers should not expect council members or city staff to comment on or respond to the speaker's comment during their 3 minutes. I'll now go through and introduce all council members and staff leadership. Vice Mayor Smith.
Good evening.
Councilwoman Kilgore.
Good evening.
Councilwoman Mosley.
Hello.
Councilwoman Roney.
Good evening.
Councilwoman Turner.
Hello.
And our city manager, Deborah Campbell.
Good evening.
Esther,
Yeah.
this is Gwen.
Did I miss you?
Yes,
Sorry. Councilwoman Gwen Whistler.
thank you.
I'm sorry. I was not.
Hello, Gwen. Hello.
City Attorney Brad Branham.
Good evening, everyone.
And our city clerk, Maggie Burleson.
Good evening.
All right, great. Okay, so we're going to begin by standing and reciting the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mayor, we can't hear you.
You're on mute.
All kinds of a mess tonight, sorry. All right, we do not have any proclamations on tonight's agenda, so we're going to move on to the consent agenda. And I know we have some questions and comments regarding the consent agenda, so I'm going to ask staff to address some of those, and I've lost my, oh, here we go. I'm going to ask the manager, I don't know who you'd like to address each of these, but on consent agenda item D, I think is our first one that needed some explanation.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much, Mayor. I'm going to ask Paul D'Angelo
to take this one? If not him, then Nikki Reed will pitch in.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Paul D'Angelo with the City of Asheville. I'm happy to answer any questions on this home funding. But in brief, the City of Asheville, the Asheville Regional Housing Consortium, which is the 4-county region, Buncombe County, Madison, Transylvania, and Henderson County, will be receiving about $4.7 million in home funding. This is a one-time funding allocation that creates a significant opportunity to meet our housing and service needs of some of our community's most vulnerable populations. We will be working on in coordination with the Asheville Regional Housing Consortium and the 4 counties on developing a plan for spending these funds with a needs assessment, gap analysis, and public outreach. The staff report before you now is requesting that the $235,000 that we can receive in admin funding, which is more than we normally receive for home funds. 15% is what we normally, or excuse me, 10%. This is 15%. HUD is looking to let us use that additional 5% to help us get started administratively with that planning process, public outreach, needs assessment, and particular, most likely hiring a staff member. This is over 4 times our normal allocation and funding. And this is will be a lot of work for the community development team. So we have asked to recognize that additional 5% from HUD that also would like us to receive that funding so we can get started with our planning process.
I think Councilwoman Maroney has a question about this item.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. So because this is American Rescue Plan funds that do have a public engagement element, and I did hear you name that, what is our role in the consortium or how we plan to engage the public? Specifically, I'm thinking about how we might engage the impacted population experiencing homelessness.
Absolutely. So for right now, Councilwoman Turner is the representative on the Asheville Regional Consortium, representing the city of Asheville. And of course, we have representation from the other counties, Buncombe, Henderson, Transylvania, and Madison. Right now, we are in those very initial phases of figuring out the needs assessment and that public outreach that we need to do. So there will be more to come. We are recommending a nearly year process here to be able to move this funding because of the importance of the work we need to do on the front end. So more to come. We have submitted a draft timeline to the consortium that I think will get voted on in January. And 2 steps quickly that we've asked our consortium members is to immediately recommend boards, committees, meetings that we can be a part of when it comes to that public outreach, to your point. So more to come, hopefully after the beginning of the year.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions about item D? Okay, the next one we need some further explanation on is item E. And I'll turn that one over to the city manager. This is around traffic calming.
Yes, ma'am. We've asked Jessica Morris to be able to respond to that one. You're on mute, Jessica.
Hi, good evening. Jessica Morris, Assistant Director of Transportation. The city has a traffic calming program that is typically initiated by residents of a neighborhood. And so it's part of the process for those requests to come in. The questionnaire that is asked to be filled out is ask the person or persons in the neighborhood to provide information about the issue and to provide additional residents that are supportive of the city studying it. After we receive that questionnaire, we then typically do an analysis and gather data for speed and volume and crash history. And if it meets the criteria for adding traffic calming features, then we will proceed to do so. And we do that every year through an annual budget item that we have for traffic calming program. Once we've identified the projects that we're going to do, it then gets turned over to the Capital Projects Department for implementation, and they run the process for bidding and outreach. And so I think Jade is here to talk about that portion of this.
Thank you, Jessica. Jade Dundas, Capital Projects Director. As Jessica said, the project was handed off to Capital Projects. Staff did a survey of our resources for vendors that are minority and women-owned businesses. That is through HUD websites, through our internal information, our databases that we have access to. Then once those resources are surveyed for potential vendors, then emails are sent to those vendors indicating that the project is coming out and will be bid. That was done. We received 2 quotes for this work and awarded to the low bidder in this case, who is a woman-owned business and is using a subcontractor who's also a woman-owned business.
Thank you for that information. This is Kim. So the first thing I noticed is this is a great opportunity where instead of just a financial impact, we could see an equity and sustainability impact. But the main question that I'm hearing from folks that live on these streets is, how were these neighbors most recently engaged? And something that could be beneficial for the council and the public moving forward is, when was the request made and when is it being ultimately answered, so that we can gauge how long it takes for these requests to be met?
I can answer the most recent engagement is that we sent notifications out indicating that this work is being presented to council and is proceeding on the streets that have been identified. I don't know the gap between when the initial survey petition was done and to this point. Jessica, do you know?
I'm sorry, I don't know specifics. I can tell you that we received lots and lots of requests for us to investigate speeding issues or other traffic safety issues, and that we have a significant backlog in doing those studies. So if I had to take a guess, I would say at least a year, if not longer, for us to really get into the meat of project development. So it's definitely an area that we receive a significant number of requests.
Thank you.
What's the percentage of folks that need to sign on to the petition for the affected area?
I am not sure that there's an actual percentage. I would need to go back and review the traffic calming policy again, so I can get back to you with that information.
Okay, yeah, I was just thinking about the upfront engagement just to even get the process started, but I thought it was tied to a percentage. But
I did too, Mayor. So we'll get some information back to you all. Apologize for not having it. Mayor, the other F and P, I believe, are the city attorneys, Brad Brennan.
It's 40%. Sorry, 40%.
Thank you, Jessica.
Good evening, everyone, and good evening, Mayor, members of council. I'm going to speak briefly about item F on your consent agenda, which stems from a recent piece of legislation passed by the originally initiated by the North Carolina Senate. It was designated as Senate Bill 300. This passed both of the houses of the legislature and was signed into law by Governor Cooper in September of this year. And among its many parts, there were some specific elements of this dealing with the criminalization of local ordinances. This was all part of a large omnibus criminal justice reform act. The only element of which we are dealing with this evening is the updating of city ordinances to comply with this new state law. In a nutshell, what it says is that any ordinances which a city wishes to enforce with a criminal penalty must now have that language specifically included in every ordinance. Prior to this evening, the city has generally relied on a catch-all provision not contained in any individual ordinance, but applying to all of the ordinances that the city currently has and enforces in this manner. Going forward, all ordinances throughout the state that are to be enforced criminally under state law must now have the language specifying that criminal penalty in the ordinance. So what we've done here is we've added that language to those ordinances dealing with issues, infractions, and other violations of city code, which we already dealt with via criminal enforcement. Now, let me specify that criminal enforcement under state law for these types of violations only deal with Class 3 misdemeanors, which is a very low standard of misdemeanor, or by infractions, which is a lower level of criminal offense than a misdemeanor, and no more than a $50 fine unless the ordinance specifies as such, and in no case more than $500 a fine. So these are very low level infractions and criminal penalties. In each case where we are updating our ordinance tonight, they are only we are only adding the language to those ordinances which were previously enforced criminally, or, well, I should say, and we have not in any case increased the criminal penalty. So in terms of the effect of this, there is no substantive change in any of the city's enforcement, either in terms of the types of things that are criminally enforced or the degree to which they are enforced. Now, I will say that without going over each individual item where this has been added, these primarily deal with issues of property damage, traffic violations, parking violations, discharging firearms is a good example, interfering with animal control officers or breaching animal control rules, and a few variety of other things. But typically, as I said, this only deals with those ordinances which were previously criminally enforced, and now, in order to comply with state law, must have this language specifically added into each ordinance. I will also add that there are a new list of ordinances which can no longer be enforced criminally. The city did have a few of these on the books. An example of this would be the regulation of specific businesses and trades. We've removed language about that. Those are no longer, amongst a few others, allowed to be enforced criminally. And in certain cases, we found some other administrative changes that needed to be made in order to update the code to comply with our current city structure, state, or federal law. An example of this is we still have language in our code regarding privilege tax, which has been repealed and is no longer authorized under state law. We've also moved the enforcement of animal control issues away from Asheville Police Department to our Development Services Division which was done as part of our Reimagining Public Safety campaign. So those are the elements of this, but happy to answer any other questions that you may have.
Thank you, Brad. This is Kim. I heard some concern around the quantity of changes, and I appreciate you giving the information that was available to us in the check-ins. In a situation like this, my understanding is that we had a tight turnaround, that these decisions had to be made by December. These changes had to be made by December. In the future, it could benefit for us to see them at something like governance or public safety. But thank you for that additional information.
And I do appreciate that addition, Councilwoman Roney. It is really important to note that this was an extremely quick turnaround. In fact, as I mentioned, this law was only passed on September the 2nd of this year. And the requirement is for each municipality to pass these ordinance updates by December 1st. So given our schedule, we essentially had only this meeting to be able to bring it to you, which is why it did not additionally go through some of the committee structure. Under all normal circumstances, that would certainly be the case. That also speaks to the massive volume of these changes because we did have to meet that deadline in order to comply with new state law.
I think we had one other item. Brad, you going to cover?
Yes, Mayor, I'm happy to. I believe this is item P, which is the final item on the consent agenda. This actually deals with a change to your City Council Rules of Procedure, specifically Rule 27. Recently, in reviewing the City Council rules, it was noted that there was an inconsistency in your current rules and state law, also with regard to the way that we currently operate regarding public hearings. So currently, Rule 27 requires that all public hearings performed by City Council actually go through a secondary preliminary step of voting to set the public hearing. Now, this is absolutely required for some public hearings, but the vast majority of them are not required to have this two-step process. In most cases, you merely notice the public hearing and conduct it at a single council meeting. There are some circumstances, such as annexations, where two-step process is required. However, it is absolutely not required under state law to do it in each and every case. Therefore, we are updating or proposing to update your council rules to align with state law so that this two-step process is voluntary and will be done either when it's necessary under state law or when the council deems it appropriate to take that additional step. I will also note that there is one additional wording change proposed where the vote to set a public hearing was to be done by a, quote, special order. This is simply not the procedure that we use. We act on resolutions, so we're proposing to change special order to resolution. Again, neither of these are substantive changes because this is actually how council conducts itself now, and it would bring you into alignment with state law with regard to public hearings. I will also note that as a matter of effect, this will do absolutely nothing to limit the process for the public to be able to receive the required legal notice of public hearings and to participate in those hearings. We are not reducing that or changing council's process in any way.
Thank you, Brad.
Okay, do we have any other questions regarding any item on the consent agenda, or do I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
This is Gwen, so moved.
Sandra, I'll second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second to adopt the consent agenda, and I will do a roll call vote. First, we don't have anyone signed up to speak under this item, so I'll go ahead and move into a roll call vote. Vice Mayor Smith.
Aye.
Councilwoman Kilgore.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner.
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler.
Aye.
And myself, aye. Good, thank you. Next, we have the manager's report, and I'm going to turn it over to our manager, Deborah Campbell.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening again, everyone. My report today is going to be presented by Dana Frankel, and she is going to talk about an initiative that began just at the heart of COVID in an effort for us as a city organization, local government, to assist in any way that we could to keep the number of small businesses, particularly in downtown, and a lot of those businesses were restaurateurs, to provide them opportunities to operate their businesses safely. So Dana is going to talk to you about the program. We have extended this program many times, and we actually will be extending it again. And Dana will be, again, providing you the detailed information about the program and the next steps. Dana, I'll turn it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you, Deborah, and good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Dana Frankel, and I'm the Downtown Planning Manager in the Urban Design and Place Strategies Division of the Planning Department. I'm here to provide information and updates on the temporary initiatives Deborah introduced that we launched early in the pandemic that we call AVL Sharespace. I'm going to provide an overview of the program and its core elements, review some of the community input we've received, and talk about next steps. Next slide, please. So starting with some key takeaways, and we'll get into each of these and we'll revisit this at the end, but to touch on a few points. Generally, this program has been received positively. We are extending elements in their temporary format in order to continue to support local businesses to operate safely and successfully, recognizing that COVID-19 is still posing some challenges. And we are working towards pursuing longer-term, equitable, and resource-supported processes and programs moving forward. Next slide, please. So what is AVL Sharespace? You've probably seen some funny looking cones and signage and outdoor dining in the street and in parking lots throughout town. And that's what we're talking about here. So it refers to these temporary initiatives to enable more flexible use of outdoor spaces, both public and private outdoor spaces during COVID-19. Next slide, please. So these are the initiatives that fall under the program. I'm really going to focus on the first 4 and go into those in more detail. These are kind of the core programs that we've worked on. Next slide, please. And first, just a bit on our approach. So we launched this initiative in the spring of 2020. We formed an interdepartmental team to review community ideas that were coming in. There was a lot of proposals and ideas about repurposing our streets and public spaces. And we reviewed those and really tried to consider these emerging needs and what was possible for us to be able to do and do quickly. So we established some guiding principles to focus our work, and we can revisit that at the end if you guys would like. Our primary focus really became supporting economic recovery and helping our businesses operate safely. Also making sure that the public and customers can access goods and services. So we established several working teams, and I want to quickly call out a few folks. David Hazard developed fairly extensive parklet guidelines. That program we were able to launch very quickly. Jessica Morris took the lead on reconfiguring our shared streets. Claire Richardson in Development Services developed awesome online application processes. And John Philman, who didn't have as many events going on at the time, was able to lead our Parklet review team. And he actually continues to do that and is doing an awesome job and working very closely with each of those individual businesses as well. So it's been a real team effort. And we sought guidance from business organizations and from public health officials. We continue to do so along the way. Also, a lot of one-on-one engagement, and I'd say especially with in the areas where we launched the shared streets, really working in collaboration with those business districts. Next slide, please. So to just go over each of these core programs, you'll see a few photos. This is businesses who have expanded on private property. We initially allowed businesses to use up to 50% of their parking spaces. These areas would normally have minimum parking requirements. They continue to have those, but that 50% was aligned with the initial 50% capacity restrictions. We have continued to keep that in place. And these applications were being turned around in 1 to 2 days. Next slide. Expansion on public sidewalks. So we actually leaned on our existing standards for this, but we created a quick and easy process for folks to be able to utilize sidewalk space. Again, a 1 to 2 day turnaround time. Next slide, please. Our Parklet program. So we opened up the opportunity for businesses or organizations to utilize on-street public parking spaces on city-managed streets in front of their storefronts. Really, we created the opportunity for that space to be able to use flexibly. As we know, most of those are being used for outdoor dining. And you'll see we have 2 different types of parklets. There's at-grade parklets where you're just using the surface of the street, and elevated parklets where folks have built platforms. And we worked on each of these to ensure wheelchair accessibility and traffic safety and all of the safety elements that were in our guidelines that need to be in place. Next slide, please. And on our shared streets, and I think that shared streets can mean different things in different areas. I know a lot of cities have done open streets in different formats. In our case, we proactively came to these areas, worked with these neighborhood groups, and opened up the on-street parking spaces for flexible uses. And it was a very organic and continues to be an iterative process. We didn't know exactly how those spaces would be utilized, maybe for walking, maybe for pedestrian queuing, or for business use, which they had the opportunity to do for the space outside of their storefronts. And so, yeah, there's a lot of good coordination. Each area we looked at had some different characteristics We worked with the block to do some custom signage. It was an opportunity for branding for them. So that's been a neat process to work very closely with those folks to roll that program out. And next slide, please. Our timeline. So as Deborah mentioned, we have extended this program 3 times. And we are extending it again in order to work towards permanency on elements of the program and to further the development of longer term programs in all areas. So we have made a few iterations over time that I'm going to point out. In fall of 2020, we introduced a process for businesses to be able to use heaters. We're going to be using that again this year and created guidance around that. In fall of 2020, we actually transitioned our shared streets to be within the Parklet program for Parklets, just to provide some more clarity and consistency. And July 1st, we closed new applications for elevated Parklets, and we still have had the opportunity for folks to do at-grade Parklets, but we actually haven't gotten a new application in quite some time. Next slide, please. So participation, and this is interesting because folks might think of downtown, and of course we have tons of activity and tons of seating downtown, but more than half of the businesses and organizations utilizing this program are actually on commercial corridors, Merriman, Haywood Road, areas like that are using, for the most part, some of their parking lot space. We also have, obviously, a good number of folks using sidewalks. Most of those are downtown. Some of those are in Biltmore Village. And the Parklet program, we just have those downtown at this point. Next slide, please. So community engagement. So this input is from participating businesses. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I will mention a few points in that we heard from a large majority of businesses that the opportunity to expand outdoors enabled them to hire or rehire staff, which was great to hear. Across the board, pretty much everyone agrees it's had positive impacts to their business during this tough time. And recently, we administered another survey, and we heard from them that the programs have had positive impacts on staff retention, morale, and a sense of safety, not only for customers, but for their staff. So, and I'll just say anecdotally, we've heard from so many businesses, literally, that they would have closed if they didn't have this opportunity. So that feels great. Next slide, please. And we administered a public survey just this past September. We got very positive feedback. The program, just to highlight, it helped people feel safer, and it encouraged them to access local goods and services, which was really nice to hear. And people are generally supportive of seeing these programs continue longer term. Next slide, please. So we've obviously learned a lot. We've seen, and we didn't know that this is what would happen, but the programs have primarily been utilized by restaurants. We have gotten some feedback from retailers that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for them for various reasons, which is something to consider if we want to be more inclusive of other types of businesses moving forward. In most cases, these spaces are being commercialized in some way, and we do think there are some policy questions to consider to ensure that uses and fees are equitable moving forward as we look to longer-term programs. It does take significant staff time to manage these initiatives, and we currently have limited enforcement abilities. It's, you know, we acted really quickly, and now it's time to kind of figure this out longer term. There continues to be some maintenance challenges, and yeah, while this has been a great success, development of longer term programs is going to take some more time and staff resources, and also some additional public input. So what's next? Next slide, please. Thank you. So we're extending some elements, and we're working we're really going to be working one-on-one with a lot of businesses to find a path to permanency. That's the case for expansions on private property, and that's the case for sidewalks. On private property, we need to look at each specific site and see what the parking requirements are and see what can be done. So development services staff is going to be reaching out to businesses probably later this week to get that process started. For public sidewalks, we are going to lean on our existing process and we're going to begin permitting for 2022. There are some opportunities to consider fee adjustments and also some updates to standards, which will look to do hopefully fees before the next fiscal year and making progress on updating those standards as well. For parklets, we're going to allow existing parklets to stay in place through July 1st. And we're going to, during this time, work to make more progress on longer term program development. And I'll just note that that could look like two different paths. Typically, parklets, as we know them before COVID, were public space instead of parking. We may have a track to be able to create parklets of that nature and a separate track for businesses or restaurants to utilize that space. We've seen other cities call those streeteries. So we're kind of approaching two possibilities there. And shared streets are particularly time and resource intensive. I'll note many of the businesses who initially set up both on Banks Avenue, also on South Market Street, have chosen to dismantle their seating areas. We are working with Wall Street merchants to reinforce the shared street environment there. We've been working with those businesses for quite some time. It is a street that's designed to function as a pedestrian priority area. And so we are reinforcing that longer term on that street. We've gotten rid of the metered parking there. And instead of the metered parking, there will be use from the businesses as well as additional public space. And next slide, please. So also during the next several months, we're going to work on resource development, explore funding options to support a work plan for transitioning each element of this, and just know that we're making updates as we go here, and we're going to post the latest information on the city's website later this week. So the last deadline folks probably heard was January 3rd, but we are extending that. And next slide, please. And just revisiting our key takeaways. So we're continuing to support these temporary programs to enable safe business operations and access to goods and services during the pandemic to support our local economy. We've received positive feedback. We're working on long-term programs and processes, policies, and fee structures, as well as identifying resource needs. And some of those elements, as we discussed, are on different tracks. And we're going to be working closely with businesses beginning this week to transition to permanency where that's possible. Although I will note that there's not going to be an immediate path to permanency in all cases. And you can find more information on our website, asheville.nc.gov/AVL Sharespace. And I'm happy to answer any questions. And Ben Woody is here as well, who may help answer questions as needed. Do I call on Councilwoman Turner?
I think you're muted.
Well, apologies. I guess we're all going to struggle with that tonight. Thank you, Dane. I appreciate all the updates. I remember how difficult this was to roll out in the beginning and how hard staffed work. So I'm glad to see it's helpful. And I've heard from so many businesses, like you mentioned, that it has really made or broken their survival during the pandemic. So I think it's been really successful. I'm curious if we're doing anything around, one of the things I was asked recently was around busker spaces. Do you have any, we're still doing them, but folks are feeling like they're not seeing as many buskers. And of course, now we're getting into the colder times, but has any of the shared space grown any busker spaces, or is there any potential for that?
So
I know
that's
this
a
is
good,
just restaurants, but
no, I think that's a great question. And I think that's part of why when we work towards these longer term programs, we need to consider how public spaces are used and consider if, you know, if there's opportunities for dedicating more busking space. I do think there's some more public space being created specifically in the Wall Street area. And of course, we work to expand sidewalk space whenever we can. But I think it's a really good question and something that we would want to look at in developing the longer term programs.
I just really love it. You know, I work downtown and I'm walking downtown often, and the atmosphere has changed since all the on-street dining and just seeing people and seeing them eat and discuss things. It's just more active in general, and it feels great. So including some music in there and all, it just sounds wonderful. And I know it's a slow crawl back, but thanks for all you've been doing and all the folks you mentioned as well.
Thank you. Councilwoman Whistler? You're muted.
Thank you. Apparently we will all do that all day. So one of the things that I thought was interesting about this is you said that people really weren't complaining about the reduction in parking. It kind of makes me go back to, you know, maybe we should look at our UDO and say, wait, maybe we're requiring people to have more parking than we really need. You know, it's like another learning and might be interesting, and, you know, we could use space a little bit better than on, you know, surface street parking than we've got right now. And I just didn't see that as a key takeaway to something to question.
Thank you. And we did hear that from the businesses. We asked the question in two different ways. Did it impact your operations and did it impact your customers? And for the most part, folks said no. So yeah, it's definitely interesting to note. Councilwoman Roney?
Thank you, Dana. One of the issues that I didn't hear addressed yet is when we have that private use of a public space, what happens when there's not left room for pedestrian space? So how are we going to, moving forward, make sure that we have a safe place for people to commute once they get out of their car or if they arrive without one?
Absolutely. And we have created standards to ensure that there is public space, you know, minimum 6 feet, but is that good enough? I think that's one of the questions that we definitely need to consider moving forward in any longer term programs.
And I think if I could just add that is why this is kind of a slow, methodical, look at the data, do analysis before we move to some level of permanency. So this will go maybe 6 to 9 months, and then we'll relook to figure out if we have enough information, informed data in order to direct potentially some policy changes. Councilmember Whistler, I'd like what you talked about in terms of maybe even rethinking about parking standards and I dare say this, even open space standards, and or possibly looking at this as multi-use space, that it can be used for multiple activities. So yes, I really appreciate the staff and their work, and we'll respond to any additional questions. Otherwise, thank you, Ben. Thank you, Dana. We really appreciate all the work and all the other staff members that you identified. I think Ms. Roney has a question.
Yeah, I just had one more question. Have we utilized our contacts and relationships with the Open Streets programming leadership in our town to see, since we've closed Wall Street at least twice before completely to vehicular traffic, now that we're removing the parking element, could we compare that data to see if it looks like we might be able to permanently close Wall Street to vehicles?
So I think there's a lot of opportunities for Wall Street for sure. It's definitely a step forward, and we'll continue to work with both the businesses and the community to consider possibilities there. Definitely.
Thank you.
I think somebody else had their hand up, but I can't see who it is. Anyone else have their hand up?
It was me briefly. I was just going to say we did just recently vote down to a PD to reduce the speed limit on Wall Street, and there is talk of closing some streets for some pedestrian trials again. So I know the Asheville Downtown Association is engaged, and maybe there's some more ways to connect with the public and reactivate some of that.
Thank you, Mayor. That concludes my presentation. And again, thank you, Dana.
Thank you, Dana. Okay. We're going to move on to our public hearings agenda, and hold on to your seats because we've got a bunch of things we got to continue. So the first is the hearing on the 3 corridor studies will need to be continued until December 14th, 2021. And I understand this is due to additional community outreach on these items. I believe that is the reasoning behind the continuance. Can I get a motion and second to continue the 3 public hearings on the corridor studies for Hendersonville Road, Tunnel Road, and Biltmore Avenue and McDowell Street until December 14th, 2021?
This is Sage. I'll move.
Okay. Second?
This is Gwen. I'll second.
Okay, I'm going to do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Kilgore.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner.
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler.
Aye.
Myself, aye. Vice Mayor Smith.
Aye.
Okay. The next is a public hearing to consider updating the HUD Annual Action Plan for 2020-2021, and I'm going to turn it over to Community Development Director Paul D'Angelo.
Good evening, everyone. Paul D'Angelo with Community and Economic Development. Thanks for having me this evening about an amendment to the 2021 Annual Action Plan with an action requested to amend the fiscal year 2021 Annual Action Plan and correct and properly assign $225,000 in home program income received from Battery Park Apartments to fiscal year 18-19 program year and adjust fiscal year 2021 funding to reflect this change and to sign all documents necessary to implement the plan. The background talks just a lot about our consolidated plan and what that does for our community, as well as the city's role with HUD funding, CDBG, and home, and how the consolidated plan is carried through the annual action plan. I would directing everyone to the summary in the staff report. A $202,000 discrepancy, $500, was discovered in program income. The funds were inadvertently awarded twice in previous fiscal year allocations. In July of 2018, Battery Park Apartments paid back their $225,000 home loan from 2004, but there was conflicting documentation about how the funds were recorded. Attempting to correct the issue last summer, the funds were reported to HUD as program income and included in the fiscal year 2021 reallocation. Staff determined in August that the money had already been earmarked for reallocation in the fall of 2018. Staff reached out to the HUD field office in Greensboro for guidance and technical assistance in addressing this discrepancy. Community development staff, with HUD's assistance and support, arrived at the following solution, which was to move the admin funding back to 2018, but $202,000, $500 would be assigned from the current reallocation to make up the difference in funding. Our HUD field office has confirmed that this is a good solution. City has identified an existing subrecipient, the Asheville Buncombe Community Land Trust, that had agreed to have their funds substituted for their fiscal 2021 award, still pending contract. The fiscal 2021 and 21 and 22 action plan should be amended to correct and properly assign that funding received from Battery Park. And again, 10% reallocation. and the remaining 202,500. This is anytime we need to make amendments or any kind of corrections like this, it's important to bring them back through. With our HUD Greensboro office, we thought it was good to bring this forward to council as well. This went through committee, the Asheville Regional Housing Consortium, as well as Housing and Community Development. We had a staff recommendation with no fiscal impact here on any city funding. This has to do with our annual HUD allocation to amend the action plan and assign that funding properly. And I am happy to answer any questions on this amendment to the fiscal year 2021 annual action plan.
Any questions?
No
Okay.
questions, and I'm happy to make a motion.
Okay, well, I'm going to open the public hearing and then I'm going to close it because we have no one signed up to speak on this. So please make a motion.
I move to amend the fiscal year 2021 annual action plan and correct and properly assign $225,000 in home program income received from Battery Park Apartments to the fiscal year 18-19 program year and adjust the fiscal year 2021 funding to reflect this change and to sign all documents necessary to implement the plan.
This is Antoinette. I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'm going to do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner.
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler.
Aye.
Myself, aye. Vice Mayor Smith.
Aye.
Councilwoman Kilgore.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Public hearing item C. This is also a hearing to consider updating the HUD annual action plan for 2021-2022. This time I'm going to turn it over to Paul D'Angelo once again.
Great. Thanks again for having me. Paul D'Angelo with Community and Economic Development. Just shifting a year ahead to fiscal year 21-22 and our annual action plan for an amendment here. Somewhat of a longer staff report here, but the action requested is to move additional CDBG funds to contingency to be allocated next spring in our fiscal year 22-23 application cycle, updating the home funds allocation and authorizing the city manager to submit the amended 21-22 annual action plan to HUD to reflect these changes. Most years, the typical cycle is we receive notification of funding. In March, we do an allocation round for CDBG and home funds. That gets finalized in June. And then usually in August or September, we go back to look at the home funds again based on the tax credit awards that happen. So we're doing that with our home funding in the staff report, bringing that back like we normally do, how those funds have been reallocated based on tax credit awards. But in the CDBG allocation, we're looking at some funding that was returned this previous year. So we want to make sure that that gets allocated to next fiscal year so that that can be distributed. That's about $134,000. And then lastly, because of the challenges with home ownership and home prices in our region, the CD team was able to take advantage of an opportunity to amend our annual action plan and our HUD home ownership value limits to better reflect true housing costs in our region and to better assist home ownership. CD calculated the current home ownership value limits, which are normally lower and based on HUD amounts. We were able to get up-to-date data from the 4-county region and take advantage of those value limits that are out there. 95% of the median area purchase price for single-family homes. We can turn this in with our HUD amended annual action plan, and if accepted by HUD, we should be able to assist more homeowners at perhaps more realistic homeownership rates. So a request here for 3 changes to move the contingency funding of about $134,000 to fiscal 22-23 allocation. That's going to, those applications will go out in December, accept the new home awards that have been adjusted from tax credits, and lastly, submit some of the data for more realistic HUD home ownership limits. Hard to say. And I think Steph is calling on folks. So Councilwoman Whistler, and a reminder to not mute yourself.
Okay, I just unmuted. Thank you.
Although I may change my mind depending on the question.
Okay. Well, I think you can mute me if you want, Paul. Don't do it though.
Absolutely.
So these, the programs where the funds are coming back, I mean, some of them, less than $1,000 are a little like, who cares? But do we know why, some of these funds are coming back, the larger amounts that are coming back from the agencies? Is it just COVID? They weren't able to spend their funds, or did programs fall apart? I mean, and, kind of, are there any lessons learned from these funds coming back in? I guess that's my question.
Sure, that's a great question, Councilwoman Whistler. So normally we see a little bit of this each year, but in much smaller amounts. But as a reminder, since I've been with the city, I don't think we've had kind of a normal HUD cycle where we actually get our HUD contract in October. There's been government shutdowns, there's been COVID. Last year, we didn't get our HUD contract until March. This year. And so literally our funding gets out the door. Everyone has to kind of scramble to make sure they've got the receipts so that they can get paid back, all to close out the fiscal year and June 31st. It was quite a bit. I think our agencies did a great job to get this funding back into the community. There were some leftover balances. Two of the agencies just struggled a bit to move their funding. Riverfront Development, great job, but to be able to move that funding became a challenge. It had been on the books for a few years. HUD wants to see us put funding towards, shovel-ready or movable projects. And then regarding the funding that went to Homeward Bound, they actually were able to do that capital stack to purchase the days in without any federal funding. This federal funding would trigger a lot of activities in this round that wasn't quite necessary. They may do that when it comes to their renovations, but they had the funding to put that purchase together. So we were able to receive that money back. We'll send the $134,000 out fiscal 22-23. Reminder to the community, those applications should open in December.
Thank you, Paul. That helps me.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to open the public hearing and I'm going to close the public hearing. There is no one signed up to speak on this item. I will entertain a motion.
This is Gwen.
I'm happy to make a.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sage.
Really, go ahead.
I make the motion to move additional CDBG funds to contingency to be allocated next spring in the fiscal 22-23 application cycle, updating the home funds allocation and authorizing the city managers to submit the amended 2021-22 annual action plan to HUD to reflect these changes and to sign all documents necessary to implement the plan.
This is Sage. I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. I'll do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner.
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler.
Aye.
Myself, aye. Vice Mayor Smith.
Aye.
Councilwoman Kilgore.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Paul. Next is public hearing item D. This is the, it was supposed to be a conditional rezoning amendment of 511 Brevard Road, but it needs to be continued until December 14th, 2021. Do I have a motion and a second to continue this item to December 14th?
Shanika, so moved.
Thank you.
This
This
is
is
Gwen.
Kim, I'll second.
Okay, I think Kim Maroney got the second. Okay, I'm going to do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Kilgore.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
Councilwoman Maroney.
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner.
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler.
Aye.
Myself, aye, and Vice Mayor Smith.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're done with the public hearings portion of the agenda. We do not have any items of unfinished business. Under new business, we have 3 items. The first item, new business, item A, 1 and 2 is it's 2 items related to the 911 consolidation. And we're going to start this item off with Kathy Ball, who for the last time is presenting to us.
Thank you,
Before
Mayor.
she leaves us to go to Tennessee.
Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and members of City Council. As the Mayor said, I appreciate the opportunity to come before you tonight with 2 different items that are related. The first one is the opportunity to consolidate the city, the county 911 system dispatch services, as well as the second is to do a budget amendment to appropriate money that the city has been receiving for the purposes of upgrading equipment for the 911 services. So the key takeaways is this is an opportunity for the city and the county to coordinate communication and services and operations under one entity. Currently, our fire department already receives calls through the county, and our police department has a separate system. And I would note that we do have Chief Burnett on the call if we have any questions around the fire department. Consolidating 911 services is a step forward in a systems approach to reimagining public safety that I will touch on at a very high level. This requires an intergovernmental agreement. This intergovernmental agreement addresses the cost issue, data access, and the operational decision-making to enhance community service delivery. The state as a whole encourages consolidation of 911 because it enhances the quality of service for all of our community. Next slide, please. So currently, the county receives call, as I mentioned before, for the fire departments, including the city's fire department, but all the other fire departments within the county, our EMS services, Black Mountain and Montreat police departments, and the sheriff's department. Our Asheville Police Department dispatch is co-located with Buncombe County. They are just under different organizational authorities. The city currently spends on the Asheville Police dispatching $1.4 million, and the city is currently paying the county $210,000 to cover fire calls. Next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier that this is a step in a process. It is a systems approach as part of a process for consolidating city emergency communication to be more efficient and effective to respond to the public. It does develop the first stage of this systems approach to providing the appropriate level of response to residents in crisis from drug overdoses, homelessness, and mental issues. It's a holistic approach that better serves our community's emergency response needs to those people in our community that are most vulnerable. Next slide, please. This slide is one that has been used by both the city and the county, kind of graphically demonstrating how this process would work from a systems approach. The first step is receiving the call and then dispatching it. And that is the part that you have before you tonight. Then it moves forward into who responds to that call. And specifically here, we're talking about folks who are in crisis from mental health issues, drug overdoses, or other substance abuse issues or substance issues. So the community paramedic, the change team responds. Hopefully there's an opportunity for pre-arrest diversion. And then the relief, and you all have heard a lot about this, is through 2 different sources, the BHUC, which is also known as the Behavioral Health Clinic on Biltmore Avenue, as well as the emergency shelter that has come before you several times. So again, the purpose of this slide is just to demonstrate that it's part of a larger system, and this is the first step in that system. Next slide, please. So we've talked about this some, but why consolidate? I mean, we've said it's more efficient, but why is it more efficient? So it helps eliminate call transferring. When folks call in, they typically don't care if they're in the city or county. It helps for more consistent and effective service delivery. It provides opportunity for integrated response and backup. We think there will be better service between agencies and responders in the field. The staff will be more efficient and versatile to respond to a wide range of emergency service calls because they will be trained on how to do all of these calls. And then expand opportunities for alternative response methods through consolidated training and procedures. Next slide. So the intergovernmental agreement is kind of the how. That's the tool that we're using to make it happen. So it includes specifically items around how do staffing that currently work for the Asheville Police Department, how are their jobs impacted through this? I'll go into each of these a little bit in more detail, but the agreement itself does speak in detail to these items. The cost of doing this agreement or transferring this over, access to data, operational decision-making, and then a termination clause. Always the opportunity within this agreement to identify if it is not working for both parties, how to terminate the agreement. Next slide, please. So the staffing transition, there are 19 full-time equivalent positions from the city that would be under the county management if this is approved by City Council tonight. Employees will be made whole with no reduction in pay or benefits. Being made whole essentially means that they won't lose any money in their paychecks, nor will they get reduced benefits. In fact, in most cases, they will have improved benefits. City staff will agree to provide backup coverage for 6 months as we are able, and that is given the ability of actual officers to be able to provide that backup service. Next slide, please. So the cost, the model for the cost, I failed to mention that we are entering, if council approves, we're entering into this agreement tonight, but the county is working with all of the other agencies that are not currently within the agreement to work with them on a similar agreement. All of the methodology of calculating the cost are the same. It's a percentage of the population of each municipality, as well as the calls for service in our case, for the city. Again, the formula will be applied to every other community in Buncombe County. The city's maximum annual cost is estimated to be $2 million, but it is based on actual cost and billed on a quarterly basis. So that is the actual maximum amount. And in the agreement, in no case will it increase from year to year more than the CPI. Oh, that's Consumer Price Index. So this gives you, thank you, Ashley. Yes. So compared to what we're currently paying, I kind of mentioned these numbers before. I will go into a little bit more detail. So we're currently paying $1.4 million in police services that are within the city. And then we are contracting with the county for around $210,000 for a total of $1.61 million. Under the consolidated agreement, again, it is a maximum of $2 million, and the difference being $400,000. I mentioned that there's a second part that we're asking City Council to approve, and that's a budget amendment in the amount of $837,605 that would be moved into the account to help cover this differential for 2+ years, if in fact the cost does exceed $2 million or does go up to $2 million. Next slide, please. So data, the city will have access to all of the data that we currently have now, except for audio recordings. And when I say have access, I mean immediate access. So when a call is put into the computerized data system, our staff will be able to access it. The only exception is audio recordings of the caller making the call into 911. And for audio recordings, the agreement specifies that would be available as soon as possible or as soon as requested, but no longer than one shift, which is 12 hours. So in no case would it take more than 12 hours for us to receive that information. Next slide. One of the biggest items that we work through closely with the county is the way that the governance committee would be set up. So there would be a governance operational decision-making body. It would be called the Communications Steering Committee, and it would review performance and compliance with data and resolve questions, issues, and disputes relating to the 911 call center operations. So if there's any agency that is within this body, they would bring questions before this group to get them resolved. The list below is a list of the makeup of the committee. When we had talked to council about this previously, there were some questions about the number of at-large members. What we heard from the majority of the city council members was either they were okay with the one committee member or it didn't matter. We had one that really would like to see two, so we're open to hearing more information if council wants to revisit that. Next slide, please. Kim.
So if we can go back to that slide, in addition to a desire to see more community voices at that table, my question was, is there a desire to have an odd number? So stacking a board with 8 may present some challenges, just with it being an even number.
Yeah, if you can go back, Ashley, to that previous slide. To address your first question, Kim, all of the issues that come before this body are technical in nature. So even the person that is selected as the community member at large would have to be somebody who's knowledgeable about the technical jargon. So it's not necessarily a community member who's just concerned about calls. At the end of the day, most of the decisions will be made by the county manager. I did speak to the county about this issue, and they were very comfortable with having 8 members.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So again, under the governance operational decision, this was a huge and important issue for the city, is to make sure that the way that we receive calls, we process calls, and that the call was sent out to our emergency responders was made totally by the city of Asheville for all of the city calls. So in other words, within our jurisdiction, we wanted to be able to control the protocol around how the call was received, how it was put into our computer-aided dispatch system, and then how the dispatcher made the call to the responders. So that really handles the majority of all the issues that we have around the governance committee, as long as the city has control over those issues. The county will work directly with the city to ensure that call taking and processing operations align with accreditation. Both the Asheville Police Department and the Asheville Fire Department are accredited, and part of their accreditation is based on this dispatching. Any decisions that would impact multiple agencies would come before the steering committee that we mentioned before. Next slide, please. So the final item that we talked about was termination. There is a termination clause within the agreement that would allow either party to terminate the agreement by giving the other party written notice of 6 months in advance of July 1, which is the renewal date. Upon termination, the city would reinstate a call center at 100 Court Plaza, which we know as the municipal building, and the county would transfer equipment back to the city so that we would have an operational call center. Next slide. So again, I would just reiterate the key takeaways. This is an opportunity for the city. This is a huge step forward in the city coordinating a much larger system under one entity. It is a systems approach in the beginning of a systems approach around reimagining public safety as far as the way that we receive and address calls. It addresses the key components that were of concern to our staff in making sure that we provided really good service and that we were accountable to our community, which included cost, data access, operational decision making, and operational decisions. And again, it's a best practice from the state. Next slide, please. So tonight we're coming to you to ask for approval of this intergovernmental agreement. The county, it will go before the county commissioners November 16th, which is next Tuesday. And then it would begin implementation January the 1st of 2022. And I think that is the last of the slides. Yes, questions? Thank you.
And Mayor, if I could, I just would like to acknowledge that functional consolidation between the city government and a county government around a function is not an easy task. There are just lots of details that had to get worked through. And I just appreciate Kathy's leadership on this, as well as, if I could, just acknowledge both the fire and police chiefs, Burnett and Chief Zach, the finance director, Tony McDowell, and our interim assistant city manager, Peggy Rowe, who also worked as a team on this, as well as John Maddox and Brad Branham. And man, I could just probably literally list 10 or 12 other individuals that worked on this, because again, it was a lot of detail. Every word, especially with that intergovernmental agreement, was looked at with a fine-tooth comb. So again, just appreciate the work, appreciate the time that you all gave us to update you all on this initiative. And I hope that you will see fit to approve it. So thank you. And thank you again, Kathy.
Thank you. And thank you all for all the hard work. And also shout out to the county across the way. They're going to vote on this after us. I think this will be a great thing for the city and the county, and for the folks that live here who will receive the services. There's some hands up. Gwen, you have your hand, and Kim.
Oh, I think this is great. The idea that we're working a little, closely together, and it's just, one more step of doing things in a smart way, I think is great.
Ms. Rooney.
Councilmember Rooney.
So I know this came up in our check-ins, but another thing for us to think about when we're collaborating together is the future. And so having visited the facility and seeing that the staff work in a building that's required to not have windows, when we think about future land use and the wise use of taxpayer dollars when land is so expensive, I'm excited for the opportunity to see a future where our 911 staff may be able to have an office with windows. So could we speak a little bit more to the need for a second facility in the future?
So Kim, excuse me, Councilmember Rooney, I'm sorry. As part of this, the county is required to provide a backup location. So I think they're in the process of trying to identify where that could be, and they're getting input, I think, from their staff, as well as the staff who currently work for the city, around the same issues of having a better location to work, especially in the stressful environment that they work in. So I'm happy, I will be sure to pass along to them, but I think they're aware of the need for there to be better conditions, especially with having just natural light and windows available to them.
Thank you.
Councilmember
I'll just
Turner.
share briefly. Yes, thank you, Kathy. And thanks for all that information and for all your work on this. When I was onboarding the council, this was something I had to learn a lot about. I didn't know much about. And one of the things I did was took a ride along with the community paramedic pilot program, which is really inspiring work that we're doing in the community. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that in the future. But what sticks out to me that is related to this is that at the end of that day in the field with them, I asked them, what is it that really would make what you're doing so much more successful? How do we expand it? How do we grow it? What do you need? And they pointed to two things, really. One was this consolidation of the 911, and the other was a high access shelter like we've been talking about with Ramada. So I just wanted to kind of, I know we're talking about reimagining police, we're talking about addressing lots of community needs, mental health, addiction, all of these services, homelessness, and there's so much that is wrapped up in this that also ties to the 911 call center. So just kudos to everyone, and wanted to kind of draw all those things into their interconnectedness. But thank you.
Any other questions? We got a two-part vote on this, so just let me know. Are we ready? All right, do I have a motion and a second to adopt a resolution authorizing the execution of an intergovernmental agreement with Buncombe County for the consideration of a 911 system?
So moved.
This is Kim, second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. We don't have anyone signed up to speak under this item. I'm going to do a roll call vote. Councilwoman Whistler.
Aye.
Myself, aye. Vice Mayor Smith.
Aye.
Councilwoman Kilgore.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner.
Aye.
And then as a corollary to this, we need to make this budget amendment. Do I have a motion and a second to adopt a budget amendment in the special revenue fund in the amount of $837,605 from, it says country on this, but I assume it means county, contributions towards city radio maintenance for the consolidation of a 911 system?
This is Gwen, so moved.
Sandra, second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Again, no one signed up to speak under this item. I will do a roll call vote. Myself, aye. Vice Mayor Smith.
Aye.
Councilwoman Kilgore.
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney.
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner.
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Kathy, are you gonna stick around to the end of this meeting so we can cry all over you at the end? I hope you do. Okay, good. Okay, new business B. I'm gonna turn it over to the Vice Mayor for the last item of new business related to boards and commissions.
Thank you. Boards and Commissions Committee met this morning, and we're making the following recommendations for our November appointments. For the Alcoholic Beverage Commission, the committee recommends the reappointment of Max Hayner and Nian Avery. Is there a second?
This is Gwen.
Kim.
Go ahead.
Who is it? I heard Gwen. Let's go with Gwen. Okay, I'll do a roll call vote for approval. Councilwoman Whistler,
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner,
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney,
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley,
Aye.
Councilwoman Kilgore,
Aye.
myself, aye, and Mayor Manhammer.
Aye.
Okay. Motion carries. For the Board of Adjustments, we had a vacancy for the alternate seat. So the board recommends the appointment of Andrew Gerard, maybe, I'm sorry, to that alternate seat. Is there a second?
So moved. I'll second, sorry.
Second. I'll do a roll call vote for approval. Councilwoman Roney,
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner,
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler,
Aye.
Mayor,
Aye.
myself, aye. Councilwoman Kilgore,
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley.
Aye.
The motion carries. And for the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee, the committee recommends the reappointment of Joel Steninger and postponing the appointment for the vacant seat. Can I get a second?
This is Kim, second.
I'll do a roll call vote for approval. Mayor,
Aye.
and myself, aye. Councilwoman Kilgore,
Aye.
Councilwoman Mosley,
Aye.
Councilwoman Roney,
Aye.
Councilwoman Turner.
Aye.
Councilwoman Whistler.
Aye.
Right, that concludes our recommendations.
Okay, all right, thank you very much. Now we have reached the informal discussion public comment portion of our agenda. Staff will now, we have 4 folks signed up to speak under this portion. Staff will now connect live calls from our speaker queue for informal discussion and public comment. Again, we are only taking callers who signed up in advance. Callers, you will first hear staff inform council that you're next to speak. Then you will hear an automated message letting you know you are unmuted and live in the meeting. You may begin speaking after the automated message. If you accidentally drop out of the speaker queue, just redial the number and meeting code, press *3 to rejoin the speaker queue. You'll have 3 minutes to comment, and at the end of the 3 minutes, you'll hear a bell and staff will ask you to wrap up your comment. I'm going to turn it over to staff to handle our callers.
Council, our first caller is Greenleaf Clark. Your mic is open.
I am calling tonight to speak in solidarity with every person in this community facing the violence of eviction. I call in solidarity with a vast portion of this community who live in fear of being tossed into the streets by the sheriff. I call in solidarity with every poor person in our community because this city, and by extension, HUD, systematically disenfranchise and displace us every day. Your illegitimate councils may actively making policy decisions that are killing us. Every day you choose an action is an active choice against human rights. Last Thursday, the people of this community stood up against eviction. You weren't there. The family being evicted, a mother, grandmother, and 2 children under 5, has been living in their home for 6 years in good standing, with part of their rent covered by the Section 8 program that HUD offers. Because of a transfer of property last spring, their new landlord, Cindy Rice, stopped accepting Section 8, but did not notify the tenants, nor provide a new lease. The Housing Authority of the City of Asheville, HUD, is responsible for the subsidized portion, but neglected to pay it for 3 months, and this became grounds for eviction. The mother said, "We are working on getting an email acknowledging that our voucher was canceled due to a mix-up, but now our voucher has been reinstated, and the eviction is going forward anyway." They twice paid to appeal the eviction in court with the assistance of fiscal legal, paid the bond and fees mandated by the court 3 times over. But despite this, the court found in favor of their landlord. They have not received any restitution from the county. They have not received their home back and have instead been displaced. These are the community's demands. 1, HUD must pay immediate restitution to the displaced family in the amount that the family desires. Number 2, the City of Asheville and Buncombe County must immediately forgive overdue rent for those living in public housing and cease threatening residents with evictions. Number 3, City of Asheville must forgive all unpaid or overdue water bills, including interest for all residential customers. We're in a pandemic. Number 4, Buncombe County Sheriff's Department must declare an indefinite moratorium on eviction enforcement. No one should be evicted ever. Number 5, the City of Asheville and Buncombe County must make camping legal on city and county property, provide 24/7 access to clean public restrooms where facilities exist, continue offering regular trash and recycling disposal, and add permanent sharps disposal containers to all public park infrastructure. Communities do not evict people. Oppressors evict people. Community resists evictions. Community houses people. If you do not take a stand against the violence of evictions, you are killing us, you are stomping on our community and grinding us into the ground beneath the heel of your boot. If you do nothing to stop this, this is on your hands. Stall evictions now.
Council, our next caller is Carol Whitmore. Carol, your line is now open.
Dear Councilwomen, thank you for your time and attention. Last weekend, a Nashville busker was robbed in broad daylight in the busy part of the city. Recently, a close family member of mine joined some friends downtown for dinner and was disgusted by what gross things were on the sidewalk and stated she did not intend to go back downtown. These stories and experiences inspire me to revisit a program that I had previously submitted to City Council to be considered under the Reimagining Public Safety Paradigm. The program would be called the Asheville Ambassadors and would consist of 4 electric bike patrol riders. Each rider would receive a living wage. The downtown area would be divided into 4 quadrants, and each cyclist would take turns riding that area during their prescribed patrol times, rotating quadrants frequently. Each cyclist would be provided appropriate safety equipment and communication devices, such as walkies and cell phones. Saddlebags will be labeled and would include downtown maps, information, and basic first aid kit. Also, bikes would include poles and flags on the back. One side of the flag would say Asheville Ambassadors, and the other side could include sponsors. As you ride around the city, you are part of a peaceful triage of downtown eyes, ears, and goodwill. Let's say a cyclist discovers something unsavory on the sidewalk, they could contact the street crew. If they witness someone in physical distress, they would have a hotline to the MS. If someone deemed to be homeless in a distressed state, appropriate response teams could be alerted, and of course, maps and directions could be given out at tourists at free will. Please note, the cyclists are ambassadors and not police. All circumstances, cyclists are directed to right away and then make appropriate calls. Funding could be provided through some of the $770,000 that was allotted to reimagine public safety programs and partnering with tourist-driven organizations, downtown merchants, churches, individuals, etc. Unfortunately, the ratio of outputs to inputs are hard to quantify in this program. The output is significant but elusive to put into charts and numbers because the type of security this program offers is psychological. The presence of the bike patrol will give a sense of oversight, and that in itself will be a layer of safety for the downtown visitors. It will relieve police of unnecessary calls and in the process create an atmosphere of goodwill. It is unknown if the bike patrol could have any way prevented the assault on the busker Sunday downtown in daylight in a busy part of town. But I do know that clean streets and a sense of eye on the prize will bring my family back downtown to shop and eat. Thank you so much for your consideration, and I recognize that this situation in which I'm speaking is far more complicated than I can give to you in a 3-minute speech. Thank you so much.
Council, our next and final caller is Melanie Noyes. Melanie, your line is open.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, City Council. I'm calling tonight to speak about the events that happened on Thursday, November 4th, where 6 people were arrested defending a family facing eviction. This family included a mother, a grandmother, and 2 children under 5. Due to the negligence of the Housing Authority and their new landlord, Cindy Rice, who stopped accepting vouchers but did not notify tenants, this family, who has lived in this house for 6 years in good standing, was forced to leave with winter approaching and with the pandemic still affecting our community. Unfortunately, this story is not unique and is happening time and time again with properties changing hands, raising prices, and landlords not understanding vouchers and the responsibility that comes with providing housing. The city is not addressing the affordable housing crisis with the urgency that is needed. Mayor Manheimer, since you appoint the board members of HUCA, it would be of interest to our community if you started appointing people who understand how to be part of this community. HUCA is and has been problematic in the way they engage with low-income neighborhoods. You have direct control over the unethical ways in which the Housing Authority moves, so please keep this in mind. Some demands coming from the community include, and I will reiterate what Greenleaf said, number 1, HUCA must pay immediate restitution to the displaced family in the amount that the family desires. Being displaced is extremely traumatic. Number 2, the city and county must immediately forgive back or overdue rent for those living in public housing and cease threatening residents with evictions. Number 3, forgive all unpaid or overdue water bills, including interest. Number 4, declare a moratorium on eviction enforcement by the Sheriff's Department. And number 5, make camping legal on city and county property and provide 24/7 basic sanitation. While we enter into the colder months, it is important to consider the ways the city contributes to people getting outpriced, put on the streets, and pushed out of view, unable to safely access resources. People's lives are affected by your priorities. Thank you.
And Council, that was our final caller for tonight.
Okay, thank you. All right, once again, everybody, this is Kathy Ball's last council meeting with us. I think her official last day is Friday, I believe. And I just a few fun facts about Kathy Ball. She joined the city in 1997, and while she's been with the city, she has been the transportation director, the public works director, and assistant city manager. She was even our interim city manager in 2018, so a long history, and she has many accomplishments with the city under her belt. We're extremely sad to see her go. I personally have had some great times with Kathy. She has taught me a lot about all things city, and things not about the city that I learned too, but they were really interesting. And it's just been a pleasure, Kathy. You lead with your heart. You care about this community. And I'm looking at your box. I'm going to be sad to see you go. Somebody else say something. I hate Zoom.
Kathy, I'd get lost with you coming back to Asheville anytime. I'll miss you.
Okay, it's not like you're going to San Diego, but still, Johnson City, it's like an hour away.
Super thanks. I've learned so much here, and I would not be the person I am today if it wasn't for this city, the people who care about it. And I'm not leaving forever, but I am a better person today than I could have ever imagined that I would be. And thank you all dearly for your service. I absolutely love the employees of the city. I appreciate the commitment that you showed to them when you took a big chance on improving taxes, increasing taxes for the payroll. It made a big difference and it was important. But I'm leaving here a better person, and it is all so good. It is all so good. I've been so blessed. And thank you all so very much from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you, Kathy. Me and the girls will miss you.
Thank you.
And council, I'm sorry. Our last caller did hop on the call, so we're gonna patch her through. Sorry.
Okay.
Grace, your line is now open.
Hey, council. Sorry I'm a little late to this. When I moved here 15 years ago, my neighbor's parents were both still living, and every weekend I watched as her father would come out and care for his cars, each of which he bought brand new and have been in his home ever since. Even after his passing, these cars mean a tremendous amount to my neighbor, and they mean a lot to me too, because they remind me of this family that's been a pillar of my community. And this past Thursday, my husband and I encountered an individual from the city's Development Services Department that was citing my neighbor for having these vehicles on her property. This comes after this has happened to her several times with folks who I suppose have the valuable time in their day to waste harassing my neighbor. It's a mentality that I don't understand and which doesn't foster a sense in our community. And I was able to navigate to the complaint through the Asheville app and learned that this person who called doesn't even live in my community and owns a vacant lot down the street. I reached out to Ben Woody at Development Services, who was really tremendously helpful and gracious. And I let him know that I was concerned that folks who've been living in our historically Black communities for generations are being targeted through these enforcement policies. And my neighbor has repeatedly expressed her feelings that gentrification makes her feel unwelcome in a place she and her family have lived for a very long time. Beneath this story is a larger equity issue that I think it's imperative that you all address at council and that you are actually really able to, which is great. Our current system deputizes private citizens to drive the enforcement of hundreds of complaints. These are a result in policies that fine our neighbors and add a lot of additional work and economic distress to the plate of folks who have already been impacted strongly by gentrification. And although I don't have data on the city of Asheville to know that this is a racial equity issue, Portland has recently studied the topic, and I'm going to email you all after this meeting with some additional resources. What they found in Portland, it said the analysis shows cities' reliance on complaints for enforcement adversely affects communities of color and neighborhoods vulnerable to gentrification. Race and ethnicity and the 5-year change in home value were the 2 neighborhood factors that had the strongest positive association to complaint rates. On average, households in neighborhoods with higher percentages of people of color and greater increases in median home prices over 5 years were most strongly associated with higher complaint rates. They also said, in short, the auditor's office finds that wealthy white people are moving into low-income and racially diverse neighborhoods and complaining about their new neighbor's property, and those complaints are putting people in debt. With our city's commitment to equity, adjusting policy regarding the Asheville app and our city's complaint-driven enforcement system seems like a great and simple place for us to implement change and reduce harm. Ben has been extremely helpful, and I think it's really worth reviewing whether things like cars in someone's driveway is even an issue that we want to use the city's valuable time and resources to go after low-wealth folks and folks in communities of color to enforce. Property restrictions have racist roots and have long been used for the purposes of gatekeeping. In the meantime, I encourage my neighbors once again to evaluate who you are harming by making such complaints. Stop for doing these things. Respect the
Okay, council, that concludes our meeting. We do not have another meeting in November. We have one meeting in December, and originally we thought that meeting would be in person, but since we only have one meeting in December, I think we're going to make a clean sweep of the year. And well, we briefly met in person back in the spring, but anyway, we'll have this final meeting virtually, and then it is anticipated that the county will likely lift the mask mandate, not for sure, but likely, and we will resume in-person meetings in January. Okay. All right. Good night.